topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
What's working on purpose anyway? Each week, we ponder the answer to this question. People ache for meaning and purpose at work, to contribute their talents passionately and know their lives really matter. They crave being part of an organization that inspires them and helps them grow into realizing their highest potential. Business can be such a force for good in the world, elevating humanity. In our program, we provide guidance and inspiration to help usher in this world we all want, working on purpose. Now, here's your host, Dr. Alise Cortez.
Welcome back to the Working on Purpose program. Thanks for tuning in again this week. Great to have you. This show has been brought to you with passion and pride since February of 2015. I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez. If we've not met yet, you don't know me. I'm an organizational psychologist and logotherapist, speaker, and author. And my team and I at Gusto now help companies to enliven and fortify their operations by articulating their purpose and building inspirational leaders and cultures activated by meaning and purpose to turn those companies from a flatline EKG to a vibrant destination workplace. There, people are intrinsically motivated to perform at their best, can grow into their fuller potential, and are committed to stay and dynamically deliver on the company's mission. You can learn more about us and how we can work together at gusto-now.com or my personal website, alisecortez.com. Now, getting into today's program, we have with us today Todd Davis. He's a senior consultant and thought leader at Franklin Covey. With over 35 years of experience in human resources, talent development, and executive recruiting, Todd spent 27 years as chief people officer at the company, where he was responsible for the global development in over 40 offices reaching 160 countries. Sounds amazing. Additionally, he authored and co-authored books including Get Better, 15 Proven Practices to Build Effective Relationships at Work, and Everyone Deserves a Great Manager. Yes, they do. He joins us today from Salt Lake City. Todd E. Hardy, welcome to Working on Purpose.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Appreciate that introduction. One quick correction. So I've been with Franklin Covey for 28 years. It was 18 of those years that I was their chief people officer.
Okay. Thank you for that correction.
I don't want the current chief people officer to say, hey, wait a minute, what are you doing?
Yeah. You're already coaching on my space, on my turf.
That's right.
Well, I'm really very happy to have you on, Todd. This is such an important topic, this idea of conflict. And as we get into it, I want to first start by talking and just learning why, in order for us to be able to work on a topic like this, we have to have some connection to it and some passion around it. So I'm interested in, why do you care about the topic of conflict and navigating through it? And what's your anchor to this?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking that. You mentioned one of the books I was honored to write on behalf of Franklin Covey, Get Better, 15 Proven Practices to Build Effective Relationships at Work. And what I have learned throughout my career, and particularly in the role of chief people officer, is that, as Jim Collins said, you got to have the right people on the bus, and I totally agree with that. But it's actually and it's actually the nature of the relationship between those people that makes all the difference in a culture, in a team, and organization, and to the bottom line. And so relationships, and I'm not just talking about being nice to each other, but really effective collaborative relationships are the key to successful cultures and to successful business. I found that time and time again in my work. So while we want a lot of different opinions on the table so we can get to a great solution, we got to figure out now how to share those different opinions and not just tolerate, but really welcome those different opinions so that we have all these pieces to the puzzle we can work with to create whatever it is we're going to create.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and conflict kind of gets in the way of that unless we know how to navigate through it, right? So one of the things that I find intriguing, and I guess I'm not going to complain about this, Todd, and maybe you probably don't either, that we weren't actually taught conflict navigation in elementary school, high school, and why I'm not complaining is because both you and I address these kinds of issues that aren't taught very well in school. So we can't complain too much because it's our livelihood, right? But why isn't something like conflict navigation taught in high school or in elementary school?
I think that is so interesting. And lots of people ask that. I ask that. I think, gosh, if this is such a fundamental piece to not just getting along in the world, but really making headway, why isn't it taught? We teach debate. I was on a couple of debate teams, and And debate is almost not the opposite of what we're trying to accomplish here, but it's like, how do I win? How do I get my point across? Versus how can we collaboratively work together, and how can we communicate effectively and respect each other's opinions? And there's an element of that in debate classes, but not much. And then communication classes that I think of, it's all about talking and getting my point across. It's not, we don't have classes on how to listen. And boy, is listening such a critical part of navigating through difficult conversations. So I'm with you. I'm there's a part of me that's glad they don't teach it, because that's what I do every day out on the road as a senior consultant. But it is a really perplexing question, and we look at, not to get into anything too far out, but we look at all of the controversy and the anger in the world right now, and you just wonder if navigating and showing respect and courage and consideration were taught from a very early age, would we be at this place we're at all over the world?
Mm-hmm. It's interesting you say that. Yeah, I'm co-authoring a book called Soulful Healing, which really also really speaks to the notion of being able to listen and empathetically connect with people. And part of what we're putting forth is this is what the world needs. So I totally think that's totally safe, important to go where you just went to. So, and I appreciate that, because this show is listened to by people around the world. And I think that we do need to elevate our capacity to listen to each other, to be respectful to each other. And I certainly want to help champion that cause. So thank you for bringing that up. Very important.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so then when we think about this, what's interesting, I bet you probably experience this on a very regular, if not daily basis. When we even mention the word conflict, people can have a very visceral reaction to it, right? And so let's talk about some of the common misconceptions about conflict.
Okay. Yeah, we hear the word conflict and we immediately think argument or fight.
Right.
And when you think of the word conflict, if we think of differences of opinion, or challenging topic, I'm thinking of specifically to the course that I teach and that we teach. How do we begin to hold those conversations? What things do we have to keep in mind? If we think of it as tension, okay,
Yes.
because there's tension there, because there's emotion, there's something at stake, and tension. The word we tend to think of as a negative, but tension can actually, when harnessed, can be used for a good thing.
Yes.
Tension is in my experience is a close cousin of passion, or an outcome of passion. Something
Yes.
I feel strongly about. And boy, if we can get that on the table and harness that, then maybe we can make some real progress. That's my. I don't have the word doctor by my name like you do, but that's my take at it.
Uh-huh. I think that's really interesting. Yes, and I did see, I did take your assessment. I think I came out as an appeaser, by the way. So anyway, so then your courses, your work, how are you helping people to address some of these misconceptions?
Yeah, well, we talk about the tendency that most human beings have to avoid difficult conversations, because we something's at stake, right? And that's why this tension, these emotions come up, because something's at stake. I dealt a lot with performance conversations in my chief people officer role, in coaching leaders and working directly with associates. And so, they had at stake their livelihood. I mean, were they going to continue in the role? I had at stake my concern about the relationship. How are we going to, and that's something I think most of us can relate to. If we're going to prepare for a difficult conversation, we're worried about how the other person's going to feel and what's going to be our relationship after, and the feelings after that. And so if we can identify that and recognize that look, the mindset shouldn't just be, well, this is going to be painful, so I just got to get through it the best I can, but instead say, yeah, this is going to be difficult, but we both, if we look carefully at what we both need out of this, what I need, if I'm the one initiating the difficult conversation, what is it I need? Well, I need your performance to improve, or I need us to get on the same page, or whatever. And what do they need? Well, first and foremost, and again, I'm going back to performance plans, which is a big area, or performance discussions, which is a big area of my background. The first thing I remember is they need respect. They need to feel respected. Any one of us, when we're not the one initiating the conversation, our brain automatically goes into defense mode, this fight or flight mode. And so I try and remember that, and coach leaders to remember that, to say, gosh, anything you can do to reduce that tension and reduce that defensiveness up front is going to help them to really hear what you're saying. So that's kind of a first step. And I think I've digressed off of your question, but
No, that's great. You're doing great. You did answer the question the way that I served it up. I think what's interesting when I think about that, why don't people go ahead and step into navigating conflict, right? You mentioned it. Part of it is people are afraid of, strong emotions coming out, and I can't deal with those strong, big emotions. And how do I deal with that? Or don't feel like they have the skills to go into it. So just feel like, I don't even want to go in there. So,
right.
but it's interesting. I had Dr. Raj Sisodia on my show a few weeks ago talking about his latest book, Awaken. And he talked about how his co-author wanted one of their other authors to be further down the list in the naming of the book, and so Raj didn't want to bring that up with the author. He avoided that conversation or potential conflict, and as he said, he outsourced it, and it didn't go well because then the other author came back to him and said, "Hey, what's the deal? What's the deal?" And he said, "I could have easily handled that if I would have just done it myself."
Boy, I can so relate to that kind of a situation. I had a team member many years ago, really good person, and they did some things well, but they had a behavior that was really holding them back, and it was starting to be observed by other team members. And this is embarrassing, Dr. Cortez, because here I am, the chief people officer. I'm going to coach these leaders how to do this, and yet I fell into this. Maybe it'll just go away. Maybe the problem, maybe somebody else will address it. And this person reported to me, and I look back and laugh now because it wasn't funny. It was funny that I was doing the very thing I was coaching leaders not to do. And after it seems like this situation was about 6 months, I finally thought, because another team member came to me and said, "Hey, Todd, this is getting out of hand, and you're looking bad. The department's looking bad. We don't get this addressed." And shame on me, but I went to the person and finally had this very awkward, difficult conversation. If not handled correctly, could feel like a personal attack. It wasn't a personal attack, but I could appreciate how they might feel that way. And yes, they were upset. And yes, they were offended, I'll say, and hurt. But what they were most hurt by are the 6 months that I had waited to have it.
Mm-hmm.
We finally got to the heart of the issue. They didn't necessarily agree. They saw the situation differently than I did as far as what they needed to change, but they also appreciated that they needed to make that change. But they came back to me and said what was hardest to hear was that you had known this for 6 months. And so for 6 months, I continued to do this thing that was alienating people, and I didn't know it. And then I thought, shame on me. You're exactly right. We err on this side of being considerate. We talk about balancing courage and consideration. Most people err on the side of being considerate because they're so thoughtful and concerned about the person's feelings. And yet, what is really considerate? I mean, how inconsiderate was me to let this thing go on for 6 months when this person could have started to course correct that much earlier. Sorry, I have very long questions to very short, very long.
No, this is exactly the nature. Don't apologize for good content, Todd. Take that back. Not accepting that apology.
All right. I err on the side of consideration. So.
Okay. Well, I did just last night. I went to an SMU leadership series talk, and there was a woman who was, I think, the CEO of Celanese. She had been an executive for Exxon for years, and he asked her what's your biggest regret in your career, and she said just that. She said, of not responding quickly enough to things that were important. Welcome to being human, right? So seems to be a common refrain. But so you showcase something that you wished had gone, or you wanted to go better than it did at the time. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about a case study where effective conflict navigation led to some significant or positive outcomes, whether it's in an organization, a company. That'd be the ideal.
Right. Yeah. Well, I've got some personal. It's in a business setting, but one that I was personally involved with, where. Again, a performance discussion. There was a very highly educated, very senior person here at the organization I'm at, Franklin Covey, and this person was continually passed over for some really cool opportunities, and it was frustrating for them. And on paper, they had everything that it took and more to be selected for some of these really cool projects, and yet they weren't. And I wasn't directly supervising this person, but I was aware of them and aware of their strengths. And I started to observe and notice what I was assuming was getting in the way, and that was, let me back up here. When I wrote the book Get Better, I wrote about the things that those who are most influential in their leadership positions, whether they're a formal leader or not, what they do. And one of those things is they get their volume right. What I mean by that is our strengths. Any strength when dialed up too high starts to work against us.
Right.
This person was the most detail-oriented, organized person I had ever met. I mean, who doesn't want that person on your team, right? But that strength of this person's was dialed up so high that when things didn't go as planned, they couldn't adjust. They couldn't adapt. They were very rigid that way. And so people would work around that. They didn't want to have this person on their team because they'd rather take someone with less competency, but more pleasant, quite frankly, to work with.
Yes.
And so I observed this from afar, and I took a risk and went to this person when one other situation came up, and again, this person was passed over. And I said to them, hey, you didn't ask for my feedback, but we've known each other for a long time, and I've been observing, and I think I can see what may be getting in the way. And I approached it that way.
Nice.
And I did say, let me tell you, and I'll call this person Deb. Her name wasn't Deb, but I'll say, Deb, let me tell you, and I've been given feedback before. It stings, but it was helpful to know that the person giving it to me was only looking out for me. And I just want you to know my only intent in sharing this with you is because I care about you and I want to see you wildly successful in your role and happy. And so I began the conversation. I said, I have noticed some things, big and little, where you don't mean to, but you come across as abrupt. Maybe some would say offensive. And she looked at me, really? And we started talking about things, and I was showing her in even simple examples of how she began an email. With have you got the video product ready yet? Instead of, hey, Alise, how was your weekend? Hope things are going well. Would you mind? And this person was so senior and so educated that I assumed that they just knew to do things like that. Yeah. And this person was not. They weren't angry. They were hungry to learn those little things that might come so natural to you and me. Right. And so we spent several different sessions coaching how to begin an email, how to and I was coaching this person, and I was quite surprised, but then I realized, gosh, Todd, don't think that just because you're a certain way, everybody else is that certain way. And I'm not patting myself on the back. I'm just saying some things that come natural to me with empathy and consideration aren't natural to everybody. And so in that coaching session, this person really started to change. And I started hearing from other people, wow, Deb is...
What happened to Deb?
And all of a sudden, opportunities started to open up. And I'm not taking credit for that. I'm just saying, don't be afraid of having those difficult conversations, because while, yes, it's going to be awkward and a little bit uncomfortable, or maybe a lot uncomfortable initially, if your intent is there, and if you declare your intent, you make sure they know your intent, I'm convinced, and you're sincere about it, I'm convinced you can say almost anything. You can have any conversation. And it won't make all the emotion and the pain go away, but boy, will you be glad you did, and you'll see the positive outcomes.
That's beautiful. Thank you for that. So encouraging. Let's grab our first break here and let our listeners and viewers think about maybe how they might want to navigate a conversation that's been difficult for themselves. I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez. We've been on the air with Todd Davis. He is a senior consultant and thought leader at Franklin Covey, and the author and co-author of a few books, including Get Better, 15 Proven Practices to Build Effective Relationships at Work, and Everyone Deserves a Great Manager. We've been talking a bit about why we're afraid of conflict, how we can start to approach it. After the break, we're going to talk about some of the common pitfalls or mistakes people make when they attempt to navigate conflict. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Dr. Alise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Alise to speak to your organization, please visit her at alisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Alise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Alise, send an email to Alise, A-L-I-S-E, at alisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez, as I am dedicated to helping create a world where people realize their potential at work and are led by inspirational leaders that help them find and contribute their greatness and would do business that betters the world. I continue to research and write my own books. So my last one came out in March of 2023. It's called The Great Revitalization, How Activating Meaning and Purpose Can Radically Enliven Your Business. And I wrote it to help leaders understand the lay of today's workforce land, what they need and want from work. And then I offer 22 best practices to help you create the culture to get that. You can find it at alisecortez.com or Amazon, wherever you find your books. If you are just joining me today, my guest is Todd Davis. He is a senior consultant and thought leader at Franklin Covey, and he spent 35 years of experience in human resources, talent development, and executive coaching, and 18 years as chief people officer at the company, where he was responsible for the global development in over 40 offices, reaching 160 countries. Amazing impact. Must have had just a crazy good time in those years.
It was awesome. It was awesome. It is awesome. I'm still with the company in a different role, but it is awesome.
Yes, absolutely. So now we talked a little bit about that wonderful example you gave of helping Deb, which is just tremendous. It's amazing, and that's the thing is so often people go through life blind and they don't know the shrapnel they're putting out because no one has the courage or the care. The courage to approach them with this difficult conversation. Such a great illustration, Todd, of why this stuff is so important. So now let's illustrate some of the common pitfalls or mistakes that people make when they do go to attempt to navigate a conflict. What does that look like?
Yeah. Well, in my experience, it's okay. Well, you used the example earlier of one of your guests where they outsourced it. They outsourced the conversation, and I already talked about how that didn't go well. I haven't seen that experience yet. Although a cousin to that is just avoiding it, not having it outsourcing it to no one, hoping it'll go away on its own, and that is very common. And it only gets worse. And then, like I experienced, when the time comes that if you finally do have it, the resentment not only is for the topics that were brought up, but that you waited so long to do it. So certainly that's something that only gets worse with time. Another thing I've seen is when people go in and it's just, I got to get in and out as quick as I can. I just got to say what needs to be said and get it over with. And that's really, we talk about having courage and consideration. That's having neither. I don't really have courage. I'm certainly not being considerate. And we don't think of it in those terms, but that's what happens. So I just got to get the message across and then hope that they'll be able to get over the hurt and do something different about it. And so that's a common mistake. Another mistake that I am familiar with, and I would ask your listeners to think about this. Your tendency. Do you tend to, while we want a perfect balance, do you tend to err on the side of courage or lean towards the side of courage or on the side of consideration? And most people, particularly people in organizational development and human resource opportunities, if they're not perfectly balanced, they err on the side of consideration. And that's a good thing. That can be a good thing. But in difficult conversations, what can happen is that you're so considerate and you present the topic in such a considerate way that you leave the conversation and they didn't get the message.
Yeah.
You said it, but you didn't really say it. And so that's something that I've coached leaders on, and I used to experience myself. People who are overly considered or very considerate, what feels to them like they're approaching the line of being offensive, they're not. But to them, it feels like it. And so that's what I've coached people to say, look, you're such a considerate person that when you are direct and you say whatever the topic is, I know to you that feels like you're going to be offending them. You're not coming close to offending them. You're just being direct. So declare your intent. Hey, Alise, I want you to know I think so highly of you, and there's something I've been observing that I believe is holding you back, and I want to share it with you only because I care about you. Start out like that, like I said previously, and you can then be direct, still with respect, but be direct. So that's another pitfall, is being overly considerate, overly courageous, and yeah, you can go in and say, look, I'm glad you're on the team, but you got to change this or you're out. Well, that person's probably going to leave, because people leave their leaders, they don't leave organizations, and if
Yeah.
that's how you're going to talk to me. So this balance of courage and consideration, when those are out of whack, are where the pitfalls come.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So that was great. I appreciate so much for you laying out how to even open the conversation for our listeners and viewers. So great. Now, what gets interesting for me, and this is probably why you spent all these years at Franklin Covey, because there's so much work to do and so many layers to take on. But then we think about such things as power dynamics or cultural difference in personality. Now that adds a whole layer of complexity. It's one thing for you and I, as maybe something like colleagues, to have a conversation like this, or you with somebody on your team. What if we want to have a conversation with somebody who's a few levels above us in terms of a leadership role, or this is the CEO, for gosh sakes, or what if this is somebody that speaks a whole different language and really values things very differently than us? That becomes much more nuanced. So can you just speak a little bit to addressing some of those complexities?
Yeah, it's a really good, important point you bring up, and for us, particularly at Franklin Covey, we're a global company, as you mentioned in my intro. We have offices around the world, and so while the principles are the same, the way that you model or use those principles have got to be quite different. A direct conversation. I'll never forget. We were making a video years ago. I used to work on what was called our innovation team, where we create some of our content, and we were making a video over in Japan. Tokyo Star Bank is the name of the bank over there, and we were doing a series of interviews with some of the bank employees and the leaders there, and we were about 15 minutes behind schedule. And the one of the people over there that was for Japan, that was the host, and we were interviewing these people. They were coming in, they were so pleasant and talking, and she came to me, she said, okay, these people are really angry. And I said, they are? They don't seem angry. They're fine. And she said, yeah, they're not going to let you know they're angry. They're angry because you're 15 minutes behind and they have blocked out this schedule. And this was years ago. But to your point, there are so many nuances, the way that our behaviors and our mannerisms and our cultures show up. And so while the principle of seeking first to understand, let's say, before being understood, well, that principle and that habit the principle is the same. The way that we do that, or the way that that's received, is going to be very different in different countries. Back over into Asia, where people, I'm not stereotyping, but in general, people are much more hesitant to then speak up or engage in a conversation. When asked a question, they will give shorter answers, and they're very reserved that way. And so being mindful of that, not pushing people, we have to adapt. I don't have exact formulas here, other than to be very mindful of each culture when you're dealing with a challenging or difficult conversation, to understand what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. But here's what I will say, Alise, and I've worked not in every country, but I've worked in a lot of countries. If your intent is in the right place,
Yes.
and if you share your intent up front,
yes,
even if it's someone in a different culture. I was in Dubai, had this great experience in Dubai, and we had this discussion. And I said, look, I'm not from here, and I'm learning about you, and we're going to talk about these things here. Just know that my intent is to help. I'm here to help, and I want this office to run very successfully. So if I'm saying things that aren't the way that you would say them, being from this country, will you please let me know and help me to be more effective in what I'm trying to share? And it just opened up doors. It just, we're all human beings. That's one thing we do have in common.
That's brilliant. Todd, that is such a great thing to say. That's, put your intent out there and then ask them to give you a course correct if you go off course. Beautiful. That's the way I learned my languages when I lived in Spain and Brazil, by the way, Todd. I would say, I'm going to speak Spanish, and would you, I'm going to make mistakes. So will you just tell me as I go so I can correct myself? So then they didn't feel, it wasn't embarrassing or anything. And I learned it so much faster that way. So
I agree. In fact, if I could make another comment, at least even in the United States where I live, and in English, even in a conversation with someone that grew up here, I will often say, if it's a difficult conversation or something I'm a little worried about how things are going to be received, I will say to the person, and some people may disagree with this, but I will say, you and I are in the conversation. I'll say, hey, Alise, I need to share some information with you. I'm probably going to say it wrong. Will you give me a little bit of pre-forgiveness? Will you let me get this out? And then know that if it comes out wrong or if it's offensive, of course my intent isn't to be offensive, but I'm just going to get this out on the table and then we can start to discuss it. I will just be open and upfront like that. And it reduces defenses. It helps people feel like they're a partner with me in trying to get to the right solution here. So even without cultural differences, I will ask for forgiveness up front as I share some information, meaning if I say something that's offensive, no, that's not my intent, and tell me a better way to say it, because I need to bring up this topic.
I love that, Todd. That's so great. Next week we're going to be talking about being culturally savvy and anti-racist leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And so, learning how to speak to different groups so that you don't offend them is critical today. And so saying, I'm probably going to get this wrong. So please, tell me how you want me to address you, help me get it right. It's just gorgeous. So, but what you're also speaking to me, what it really smacks of this little thing called emotional intelligence, right? And you can't go anywhere today without hearing meaning, purpose, and emotional intelligence. It seems to me they're such common terms. So talk to us about how emotional intelligence plays in the effective conflict navigation. And then let's just talk a little bit about how we can start to improve it for ourselves as individuals.
Yeah. Love that you went there next, because I think that is the key to all of this. The word empathy is the key. And empathy, as you and I both know, is different than sympathy. Empathy is, as much as we possibly can, putting ourselves in the shoes of the other person. Yeah. And in my experience, no one can say, I know how you feel. In fact, I cringe when I hear that.
Yeah.
This is a little bit odd thing about me. When I was a little kid, while my friends were out playing ball or whatever, I was reading the Ann Landers column in the newspaper. And I don't know. Yeah, most of your listeners are probably too young to remember Ann Landers, but she was this advice columnist. And I remember my mom even saying, what are you reading that for? I think I was 10 years old, but I was just engaged by it. And I still remember an article that Ann Landers wrote and talked about the unintentional but yet offensive thing that happens when someone says, I know how you feel. And I have heard that over and over again. Even if, your mother died 6 months ago and my mother just died, for me to say, oh, my mother just died, I know how you feel. Well, you're assuming that our relationships with our mothers were the same. You're assuming that we had the same background, same experiences. And so I actually say the opposite of that with people. I will say, look, I don't know how you feel. And often people will say, well, yes, you do. You've been through this. I know. And I will say to them, but everybody's experience is different. So I want you to know, I don't know how you feel, but I really respect and appreciate you right now and what you're going through. And I'm sincere when I say that. And people, I can just tell them, feeling like, oh, thank you.
Yeah, they can just feel it. Yeah.
Yeah. All these people tell me they know how I feel. And so back to empathy, as much as we possibly can, putting ourselves in the place of the other person. And so, like I said, any conversation before it even begins, I remember, okay, if you were them, sure, it's going to be embarrassing. It's embarrassing. I don't want to be called out on something, or I don't want to be, and I'm going to feel defensive and I'm going to feel awkward. So I get that in my mind without erring too far on the side of consideration. I get that in my mind, and it really helps the way I present or tee up the conversation. Dr. Stephen Covey, the best-selling author of The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Gosh, man, I had the esteemed privilege of working with for many years before his passing. He often said the deepest need of the human heart is to feel understood.
Yes.
And when I first heard that, I didn't disagree, but I thought, is that really true? Boy, have I learned it over and over and over again. It is true. The deepest need of the human heart is to feel understood. And so even in a difficult conversation where it is a leader with an employee and it's a performance discussion and this employee has got to change their behavior, nothing works better than taking time to understand them.
Yeah.
You're not agreeing. Empathy, you're not agreeing or disagreeing. You're just suspending your feelings long enough so you can really hear them without judging, without giving immediate feedback, but just hearing them out. So that's my take on empathy.
Well, that's wonderful. And really quick, we're going to take our next break here. I don't know if you know this or not, Todd, but I've had the extreme privilege and pleasure of hosting Stephen M.R. Covey and Cynthia Covey on my program.
Wonderful.
So yeah, I'm a Covey and Franklin Covey fan. So you're in very good company here, my friend.
Lovely.
Time for our last break here. I'm Alise Cortez, your host. We've been on the air with Todd Davis. He is a senior consultant and thought leader at Franklin Covey and the author and co-author of a few books, including Get Better, 15 Proven Practices to Build Effective Relationships at Work, and Everyone Deserves a Great Manager. After the break, we're going to talk a little bit about how we can start to effectively navigate conflict even in remote work settings. Stay with us. We'll be back.
Dr. Alise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Alise to speak to your organization, please visit her at alisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Alise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Alise, send an email to Alise, A-L-I-S-E, at alisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez. I mentioned in the last break about my latest book coming out, which is The Great Revitalization. What I did for you to go along with that is I created a 3-page assessment for you to be able to download from my website, gusto-now.com. And that will help you understand the extent to which your current company's culture is operating at the capacity that it needs to attract and keep today's workforce. If you are just joining me today, my guest is Todd Davis. He is a senior consultant and thought leader at Franklin Covey. And with over 35 years of experience in human resources, talent development, and executive recruiting, he spent 18 years as the chief people officer at the company where he was responsible for global development in over 40 offices and reaching 160 countries. So as I mentioned before we took the break here, now we find ourselves in this radically different world, which is, of course, why I wrote that last book. But now when we navigate conflict in a more of a remote setting or via Zoom or phone, it requires another level of skill. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, it is more challenging. It is more challenging, and it is reality. So we can learn to do that. Body language still matters.
Yep, right.
I was just coaching somebody the other day, and even sometimes more so because we're up closer. We can see the eye rolls, or we can see
right.
Nodding head or whatever. And so being fully present as we can. I even, like I'm doing right now, I always, and this is just a tactical thing, but I always make sure I move my the person I'm talking to right up under my camera so that I look like I'm looking as close as I can right at them, just so they have my full attention. It's also so important in any conversation, quite frankly, but particularly in a sensitive or difficult conversation, to be fully present, to take off your Apple Watch if you have one that vibrates every time you get a message, and to put the phone away, and to not have other things on your desk that you think you can maybe sneak in and work on while you're pretending to listen.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, how many of us, quite frankly, how many of us have been nodding and smiling, but we're really not listening? I know I've been guilty of that. I think
While we're working on tomorrow's agenda for the meeting in the morning, yes.
Or if we're engaged in the conversation, but to be honest, we're thinking about what we're going to say next.
Right.
Dr. Stephen Covey, 7 Habits author, habit 5 is seek first to understand, then to be understood. And the big concept in there, and that one that I try and live by, is listen with the intent to understand, not the intent to reply. And it doesn't come from a bad place. We're good people. We want to solve, we want to fix. And so Alise is talking to me about something, and I hear just enough to think, oh, I know where she's going with that. And so in my mind, I'm trying to formulate, or I am formulating what I would do, and it may not even be where she was going, but that's how our minds work. And so I advise people and myself, resist that temptation and just suspend, like I said earlier, suspend my thoughts long enough to really just be there to listen, to be fully present, maybe ask questions, but not, it's not the time to advise or probe. It's just to listen. be fully present. And that's even more so well, it's always important. So, but it's a little more difficult on Zoom and through technology, but we can certainly do it.
And I think I remember seeing some of your material before too, that when we do that, it really, it reduces all of the, or not all, the emotions in the person who's sharing, so that as they share and they recognize that you do understand them. If they are frustrated, angry, upset, those emotions start to diminish. And now you can come into the productive zone, right? Of having an actual exchange that can be useful and productive. But you can't do that until those emotions that are so high are carried through and cycled to a more reasonable level.
That's exactly right. I mean, someone, and I'm making these situations up, but someone who's got a performance issue, and I say, hey, Doug, we got a real problem here. And the fact that you're late every day with his, well, I'm not late, and listen to him ramble on. And if you will, and again, you got to be sincere, just say, okay, so what I hear you saying, and tell me if I'm wrong, but you're not feeling really appreciated for the work you do. You're acknowledging that you're late, but you're saying that when you get here, you put in more time, more effort than everybody else on the team. And you're not agreeing with them, but you're just clarifying and saying, am I understanding correctly? Well, yeah, that's right. And the more you can seek to understand, not agree, but understand just what you said, Alise, you can start to diminish that defensiveness and kind of let the, what did we used to call it? Psychological air. You're giving them psychological air so that they can then breathe, and then they can start to digest. And I don't pretend any of these things we're talking about make the challenge go away, but it absolutely makes it more malleable and workable so that we can start to get to a better place.
Mm-hmm.
That come up, that's the number one reason in our course, Navigating Difficult Conversations, that's what we focus on. The number one reason people are uncomfortable or shy away from these is they don't know what emotions are going to come up, and we don't know either. But if we can be prepared for whatever kind of emotion comes up, and we use three tools here. We use pause, don't panic, observe, don't judge, and ask. Don't. So we want to pause, we want to observe, we want to ask. My mind just went blank when I was going to ask. Pause, don't panic, observe, don't judge, and ask, don't assume. Don't assume. Just ask questions. And those three tools, with most, if not all, emotions that come up, those actions can really help reduce the defensiveness and the anger or the emotion that is there present.
Mm. I'll just throw this in here. One of the things that I have gotten present to and now addressed in my work, Todd, is just how much people are afraid of emotions. And, we start off life, as these young, ebullient, joyous, expressive beings, where we can be mad, we can be frustrated, and really, really happy and really sad. And then, we go to school and we learn that we have to kind of contain these behaviors, and some things are just not appropriate in the setting. And then we start going through life, and life steps on us and squashes on us. And we learn about being ashamed and afraid, all these things, right? So by the time I meet people, probably you too, in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, you're down to the small little spectrum of emotions to work from. So they're terrified of, emotions. And so part of, my work is helping people to understand the role of emotions. They're giving you vital data from which to be able to make sense of the world and your relationship. They're not to be stuffed and feared. And so I really appreciate how you navigate through this with people, helping to coach them how to be able to address and be with people in their emotions just by listening and trying to understand them. It's just so beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. So you mentioned something earlier that I think would be good for us to talk about, and that's that this notion, and we've talked about this on this program here too, of psychological safety in the context of conflict navigation. So, some organizations, it's much more safe to open a conversation or to start to navigate conflict, and others not so much. And so let's talk about the role of psychological safety in this.
Well, yeah, we got to know we got to know the culture. We got to know the what the rules are of engagement. So help me understand a little bit more about specifically what you're asking for.
Well, especially, let's say it like this. So if I were working with and for you, Todd, I already know that you would create, a psychological safety for me to be able to probably bring up most anything, because that's who you are. That's how you. But let's say I'm working for a boss who is, well, that's Deb, that I work for Deb. And
Mhm.
I want to be able to bring something up, and I haven't quite progressed the way that you have with, with her. And I want to be able to address that, but I know that, that there might be some backlash. She might, be angry. She might yell. I mean, I've worked with organizations where the leader of the organization, when people brought things up that he didn't like, the big vein in his forehead bulged, and people were like afraid he was going to like have a heart attack right there. It's not a safe thing to be around,
Yeah.
So how to be able to navigate and, navigate conflict, even though we're in that kind of environment? How do we go
Yeah.
about that?
Yeah, what I'm going to share, and I'm not pretending this is easy. You and I can get on this podcast and talk and say, just do this and this and this, it'll be
Yeah,
fine.
it'll be fine.
I'm
Yeah.
very knowledgeable I'm very aware that that's not the case. But if I were in that situation, every situation is different. If I were in that situation, it would take some courage, and I would talk to that leader, and I would say, hey, I need to share some things with you. I love the organization. I love my role, but here there are some things that aren't working as I had anticipated them working, and I'm asking you as my leader to maybe hear me out, and could we partner on this? Could I talk to you about some of these?
Mm,
I might be looking at them wrong, and I always add a big dose of humility there, and I'm sincere in it, but I will say I might be looking at this wrong, but here's what I have viewed as happening on the team, and I'm concerned about it, and I'm not quite sure how to bring it up with you. I would never say to a person, "You're pretty unapproachable," and so but I would say I'm not quite sure how to bring it up with you, but I want to feel comfortable coming to you as my leader. Is that okay if we have a conversation? I share this with, so always honoring them, respecting their role, but also connecting with them on a human level.
yeah.
Just saying, I'm excited to be here at the company, but I'm concerned about some of these things, and I haven't been here long enough to know what is the protocol. So I'm just going to be really open and honest with you. And that's what kind of the earlier example I give. I find it's better, healthier, easier to call it what it is, to say, look, I don't know how things work in your culture, so I bet I'm going to say some things wrong here. Will you please forgive me
Mm,
and course correct me? I would use the same philosophy with a difficult leader. I would just say, hey, can you kind of help me navigate this? I'm a little bit lost here, and I'm feeling concerned about XYZ situation, or about how I'm feeling about my role. And so I just want to talk openly with you, because Alise, if their answer is, well, you're just going to have to suck up. Well, then I might want to be deciding whether this is really where I want to work, because what the leader values gets valued, and so that's going to be the tone of the
mhm.
place. But I think most people, even the most guarded, strong armor people, unapproachable people, when you can start talking in just a human way with them, most people remember they're humans.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you can
Yeah.
discuss those things.
Yeah. Well, we've I don't know how we did it already, but we've come to the end of the show already
I
here.
could talk
So
to you forever. You're awesome. You're
thank
amazing.
you. Thank you. Likewise. We are common souls here, and we are caring about some of the very same things. But I want to give you a chance to close the conversation how you like. You know the show is listened to by people around the world. We want to create a workplace where people really want to come and can thrive. They want to give their best and grow into their best. What would you like to leave them with?
Yeah. Thank you for asking that. It's a great question. Just, and I'll be quick. I know we're out of time, but first of all, people, I've said it earlier, but people leave their leaders. They don't leave organizations. They leave their
Yep.
leaders.
Yep.
And so remember that if you're in a leadership role, what you do, everything you do and say models trust and models, the culture. And then the second thing I'll say, and this is a little bit out there, but the other day I was driving somewhere and I saw a big motorhome that was towing a boat, and maybe the boat was towing some RVs, I don't know, but it was a lot of toys. And there was a bumper sticker on the back that said, "The one with the most toys wins," or she or he with the most toys wins. And I remember looking at that, and certainly being envious of all the toys they had, but I thought to myself, and I mean this sincerely, I think the one with the most meaningful relationships, the one who dies with the most meaningful relationships wins. And yes, I'd love to have those toys too, but but here's the point: if you have meaningful relationships, you find people who have boats and cars and motorhomes, and
They'll invite you over. Yes.
that's right, yeah. But I really would end with, I just think relationships at the end of the day are at the top of my list, matter more than anything else.
Hmm. Beautiful way to finish, Todd. Thank you. It's really a delight to know you. And I do have a tendency sometimes to show up on my guest doorsteps when I'm in their city. So just if you hear a little
Hey,
quiet knock, it's me.
we've got some guest rooms here. You're always welcome.
Wonderful. Listeners, viewers, if you want to learn more about Todd Davis, Franklin Covey, and the work they're doing here. Definitely check them out. Their site is franklincovey.com. Let me spell that for you. So Franklin, Franklin, Covey, Covey. So franklincovey.com. Last week, if you missed the live show, you can always catch it via recorded podcast. We were on air with Kevin Kelly, an architect of Shook Kelly and the author of Irreplaceable, How to Create Extraordinary Places That Bring People Together. He is the first architect I've had on this program in the 9 years I've been hosting it. And he taught me so much about the human condition and how physical surroundings can elevate or lower our energy and vitality. It was very eye-opening, very interesting. Next week, we'll be on the air with Colette Phillips, the CEO of her own PR firm and the author of The Includers, the 7 Traits of Culturally Savvy Anti-Racist Leaders. See you there. And remember, work is one of the best adventures and means of realizing our potential and making the impact we crave. So let's work on purpose.
We hope you've enjoyed this week's program. Be sure to tune into Working on Purpose, featuring your host, Dr. Alise Cortez, each week on W4CY. Together, we'll create a world where business operates conscientiously, leadership inspires impassioned performance, and employees are fulfilled in work that provides the meaning and purpose they crave. See you there. Let's work on purpose.